Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanny Show's Reading Rangers.
Maybe the real monster is intergenerational family trauma. Or maybe the real monster is the abusive ex. Oh, or maybe the real monster is the real monster.
Oh, goodness. That's terrifying. I'm Shaun.
I'm Steven.
And on today's show, we will be discussing this book, The Deep Dark by Knox Ostertag from Graphics, a graphic novel fantasy horror, kind of, that has been nominated for the 2025 Hugo Award.
Before we get into our discussion, a reminder to our listeners to please share your questions and comments with us at skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. If you aren't already, join us on Twitch for Shaun's Alphabet streams every Friday at 7 p.m. Central to be a part of our interactive live streaming show format. Finally, be sure to review and spread the word about our show. Help support us through our Patreon and be part of our Torture Cinema polls, live watches, or other special Patreon-only events on Discord.
All right, let's get to it. So you picked this because we asked you if you would pick something, and you went, this one. We're going to do this one. And so it's now your job to tell us more about The Deep Dark by Knox Ostertag.
Yeah, so I am just going to quote from the back cover, actually. Magdalena Herrera is about to graduate high school, but she already feels like an adult with serious responsibilities. Caring for her ailing grandmother, working a part-time job, clandestine makeouts with a girl who has a boyfriend, and then there's her secret, which pulls her into the basement each night, drains her of energy, and leaves her bleeding. A secret that could hurt and even kill if it ever got out, like it did once before. So, Mags keeps her head down, isolated in her small desert community. That is, until her childhood friend Nessa comes back to town, bringing vivid memories of the past, an intoxicating glimpse of the future, and a secret of her own. Mags won't get attached, of course. She's always been strong enough to survive without anyone's help. But when the darkness starts to close in on them both, Mags will have to drag her secret into the daylight and choose between risking everything or having nothing left to lose.
Pretty good. So the thing it doesn't say in there is what the secret is.
Yes, but we do spoilers here, so am I just going to get into that?
Yeah, might as well.
Okay, so Mags, and we learn this over the course of the graphic novel, which is 470 pages, so it takes some time for this to unfold, but she has her whole family keeps in the basement. You could call it a monster. It is a lizard or dragon-like creature that they keep locked up in a cage in the basement that was born with Mags. It's sort of her twin, sort of her family's secret shame. And it's something that has happened in this family before, and that the older members of the family know how to deal with, sort of. So she's got this dark secret, this family secret that she has to live with and manage through no choice of her own, and using the tools she was taught. And one of the questions that the book raises is, are those good tools or not?
Yeah, Yeah. I agree that's like a big part of this book is the choices they make about how to deal with this creature the best choices, which the end of it kind of suggests maybe that's not the best choice. And I think it's fair to say that by the end, the choice they make ends up being more sensible. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is interesting that the creature, it is sort of like a lizard dragon thing, as you say. There's rules about how the creature behaves and what the creature's sort of requirements are that kind of emerge through the story. And there's also some other secrets in here that I don't think I will spoil about certain characters who turn out to be other people that I won't reveal. But I found it really interesting that because it operates as her twin, and it also has like a direct life link to her. So we learned that
that's right.
Damage to the creature damages Mags. So if you hit it, it hurts Mags as well. So there's like a scene when she like basically tries to strangle it, and they both pass out as a consequence. Yeah.
Exactly.
Which is great, but it also is fun because there's the other element, which is like, because it's her twin, it also only attacks people that Mags wants it to attack, or that Mags doesn't like, or that are a threat to Mags.
That's right.
Yeah. So
although it takes quite a bit of time for her to realize that.
Yes, it does. We kind of start to figure it out, I think, a little bit before Mags does, because the first instance, which is hinted at in the beginning, is the death of this child, Emil, who is killed by the creature very early in the story. It's sort of like in the back history of the overarching story. And we kind of learn that the reason is that the kid, Emil, was kind of a bully. The problem is, like, he's a kid, and that there's a sort of ethics implied there of, like, it's one thing to use it against, like, a stalker, which does happen later in this, who is violent and possibly not quite in the same reality as the rest of us. It's another thing to use it in anger as a child against another child, because children get more leeway, I think.
Right. Well, it's a fascinating question, because, there are a lot of ways you can interpret the creature, the thing, the monster, as a metaphor, and what it's a metaphor for. But one thing you could argue that it's a metaphor for is anger.
Oh.
And when so the question is, is it wrong to unleash your anger on someone? Well, sometimes it is. You do not unleash the full power of your anger with hatred and violence and harm on a child, no matter what a jerk that child is.
Right. Yeah, you're right, because we give so much leeway to the child, but also, like, those behaviors, like learned behaviors, right? Emil's a bully because he learned it from somewhere. It's not like he's naturally a bully.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, Mags, we see via how she's grown and what she's learned and other flashback scenes, we see that she, under the influence of her family, has learned the wrong lesson from that. And she has suppressed her anger, suppressed feeling, instead of living with it and dealing with it and directing it appropriately, so that she's trapped in this situation where you can't say what she thinks or feels, not because people want that from her, but because she expects that from herself. And unlearning that is really part of what allows her to eventually come to terms with her creature.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's very interesting because the things that she does by adopting what her family does for there's a whole string of family members who have had this situation, including her brother, who was taking care of it when Mags was basically too young, and has now, like, disappeared, basically, or possibly dead, ? And so she's learned this horrible behavior, which is, like, I have to keep this secret and I can't let anybody get close. Like, she's basically being given a life sentence of loneliness, right? And so the consequence of that in the story is we see the kinds of relationships that she pursues are not relationships. They're largely sexual ones. They're just about immediate temporary pleasure. And they're also, I would note, because the relationship she initially pursues is one with a girl who's with someone else, right? There are also ones that there is only one, really theoretically, one way out of this, which is it ends in a breakup, because there is no future there without somebody leaving someone else, but she's not going to make that choice.
So I love that part of the story. I love that arc because the way it's set up at the beginning, this girl that Mags is in a situationship or hooking up with,
a tryst.
Ava is her tryst. A tryst is set up to be. The setup is that you sort of interpret this other young woman as being sneaky, manipulative, and kind of a user because she's clearly queer, has a boyfriend that is her public relationship, and she has Mags, who is her secret relationship. And so you think, oh, this is not a nice girl. And realizing as the story unfolded that she was not the problem, or at least not the only problem in that relationship, was a really powerful set of scenes. They're very brief scenes, but they're extraordinarily well done. The scenes where Mags and Ava talk, and it's clear that Ava would like a relationship with Mags, and that Mags thought that wasn't on the table, and that was part of the appeal.
Yeah.
It was a way to get, it was a way to have some sort of release of the most basic of human needs around love and sex without the danger of having a relationship. And she's trapped herself in this situation, and Ava's not happy with it anymore. And realizing that she's actually that Ava is not a bad person was a really just a powerful series of just a few moments spread throughout the book that just worked so well narratively and as character. I just really love that.
There's a lot of really interesting choices too the story makes, like visually, which I thought was interesting, because this is not a standard, like what you would think of as like the comic book format with typical frames.
So there's a lot that's done creatively with the layout and organization of panels, and with visual elements tying panels together, with the size of the space around the negative space around them, which is often black, because this book does a lot with negative space, and specifically black negative space. Hence, it ties into the title, and it ties into Mags's experience. And the use of color. Listen, I could spend this entire podcast talking about how this book uses color, because when I was making comics 25 years ago now, okay? When I was a young nerd involved in making comics, we couldn't afford color. We had to print our comic books. The web was new. Most people didn't use it for comics. We had to print them and in ink on paper, and we couldn't afford color. It cost too much. So it didn't even occur to me as I start reading this book that it was in black and white. That was just natural to me. The art is great in black and white, by the way. And so I'm just going, blah, blah, blah. Here we go. And then we get to pages 6 and 7. And suddenly there's these little elements of color. And I almost looked right past them. I actually was on the next page, and I went, wait a minute, was that some sort of pink or red? And I went back. And so there's blue, which frames a text message on one page, and red, which is Mags's blood, as she washes her hands at school so she'll look halfway normal for the day, because the creature, we didn't mention this, it drinks her blood and it feeds from her hand.
Yeah.
So she's got a permanent wound on her hand that she needs to keep clean. She's doing that at school at the start of her day, and there's the red pinkish washed out blood rinsing down the drain. And that's the first color in the book, that in the text message. And it just is such an amazing use of color, as color representing emotional intensity, color representing life, color representing the focus of Mags's attention and the things that matter to her. And you find that all the way through the book, that color is about emotional importance and what Mags is focused on.
Yeah.
Some of the flashback scenes, most of the flashback scenes to Mags's childhood and her childhood friendship with Nessa, those are in full color. That's full color. Everything is just bright, and it reflects the natural environment, which is which I want to talk to you about, Shaun, because you're probably familiar with that natural environment.
A little bit, not too much. Bit. I'm a NorCal boy.
Okay, fair enough. The story is set near Joshua Tree, and the climax actually takes place in Joshua Tree National Park. So, seeing the full color experience, so to speak, of those spaces as you do in the backstory, it's eye-opening after this washed out, fogged out, black and white muted color palette with just the occasional hint of brightness we've gotten before then. Just it's like suddenly being awake. That's the thing, right? Mags is stressed out, miserable, lonely, exhausted. She's constantly dealing with blood loss, so she's worn out all the time, on top of all the emotional stress. And so, of course, her view of the world is muted and washed out and faded, and that's the black and white. And then she has these emotionally meaningful moments, these moments when the color cuts through and she perceives it. Moments often that involve Nessa, either in the past or in the story's present, or things that involve art, or emotionally intense moments with family, or the blood that she has to use to nurture and nourish this creature. It's so brilliant, and it was just such a revelation.
Yeah, I agree that the color in particular, you're kind of describing what I noticed. Excuse me, my nose is itchy, and now I'm going to sneeze myself out. It went away. Okay, good. The thing I noticed with the color, what was kind of similar to what you were saying, that for much of at least the first third of the book, so much of it feels kind of dead. Like the life is kind of not there. And when you say that it is Mag's perspective that the book takes visually in terms of the color choices, that becomes very clear when we get the first fainting scene, where literally the she's looking at, I can't remember what the scene is, but she's looking at something, and there's almost like they used a sponge to sort of paint around these little half portion panels. We don't get to see the full panel. We don't even get to see the full dialogue, kind of like we're in Mags's mind as these scenes are progressing. Then she passes out. And that happens more than once. And so it's sort of the book is constantly trying to remind us that even when we're looking at Mags, it's almost like we're looking at Mags through her own eyes, right? We're sort of...
Yes, it's her perspective on the world that we're seeing, yes.
Yeah. And it's really, really brilliant. You're going to make comparisons here to, like Frank Miller, but not the same tone and material,
not at all.
Right?
Yes.
But he's done very similar things with that very muted palette and then using color. But this, I think, that color, it feels more indebted to character in a way that I don't see that often. Where there's such deliberate choices. This is an academic's dream, by the way, is you just going through here and being like, oh, there's color. Because even just after, once we get past a little bit of color, right, it's on 6 and 7 you mentioned, right? It's just dark, 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 dark. And it takes until we get to her first backwards in time scene when she's getting these unknown text messages, which turn out to be Nessa.
Yes.
And those are in color, but I think it's sort of a muted blue color, so it doesn't quite pop yet. But the second she starts to have this memory, this is when we realize, oh, this text message is from someone she knows. And that's when it goes into color, right? And there is exactly. on 27 in particular, right at the top of 27, we see Mag's eyes being illuminated semi by the panel underneath it, which is a memory, and semi the same color that we'd expect from the phone at night. And it is almost like her eyes looking back on her own past. It's a really cool little panel and then it's all in color, right? All the things in there, with this sort of story in the back where we see Emil being kind of a little turd, and then yeah.
But he doesn't deserve to die.
No, but he is being a turd.
He really is. He's a bad. Clear. He's a mean. He's not being a nice kid at all. He's doing some really mean, aggressive stuff. So it is understandable that there are bad feelings there. Yeah, absolutely. And then that scene ends, and Mags is just sort of
in dark again. It's all black, and it's not even full panels.
All black. No, it's not a full panel. It's just like Mags silhouetted against a solid black background with just like a little cutout, circle to just sort of show where she is in the space. And she's on her phone communicating with Nessa, and it's just back to that. It's back to that muted, exhausted, where the only sort of illumination in her life is this sudden surprise lifeline of communication she has with her childhood best friend.
Yeah. And I think the next time we get color is, I think she's getting her hand sucked on by the monster, and there's blood droplets that we see.
The blood, yeah. I think that's it. I think you're right.
Yeah, I don't know. 53, I think it is.
Yeah. And it's just the blood itself against a black background.
Yeah.
And Mags is not even sort of in part of that. There's little cutout panels of her against that background, but it's almost separate. It's like the blood is the whole world.
Yeah.
Well done.
It's very well done. Visual choices here, I would say, are extraordinarily well done. And they were the things that stood out like the most to me, was what it was doing with color, panel selection and choices, how things were framed, scenes where Mags seems to almost blend into the darkness because Mags has dark hair, and so you don't even get the full silhouette at some points. She just sort of disappears halfway into the darkness, hence the title, The Deep Dark. And of course, deep inside her own mind, right? She is in a dark place because she thinks this is her life now. She just has to feed this creature and be alone. That becomes even more pronounced when her grandmother passes away, her abuela.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Where she's sort of vacillating between these two things. There's this friend that she really likes, Nessa, who is really trying to make a deep connection with her, but then she's got this monkey on her back, or dragon lizard creature, almost literally on her back, right, holding her back, right, from making the more pleasurable choice, right? She's on the verge of just committing herself to a life of just misery.
Yes, and she is herself. She's fading into that darkness that surrounds her, and that is, as you said, central to her identity, her sense that this is not only all she will do, but this must be all she will do. A sense of obligation and responsibility, and it being absolutely inhibiting and controlling in her life it's a through line, of course, and it's such a powerful one. For anyone who I think has lived with and dealt with a complicated family, a complicated past, a complicated secret, and see that and immediately relate and understand, yes, this thing that you didn't choose is your whole life. And you think that's all you can ever have.
And it turns out that the choices she can make are different ones than the ones that are given to her by her family. And And it turns out also not the first person, and I won't tell you who the other person is that has made a different choice, but I loved that the other creature was just sitting in like what looked like a Winnebago, like having the time of its life.
Okay.
It turns out that the real threat of the creature is not its violence. It can be violent, but it's actually the family shame. That because it's a creature, right? It's a thing that would, it's sort of. We may have to come to the gender thing going on in here in a minute because I think there's some connection there too, possibly. But I think that's part of what it's tied to is this idea of familial shame about a visible monstrosity or perceived monstrosity. And I say perceived for a darn good reason because this creature is perceived to be monstrous, but it is not in fact monstrous. It turns out when we see it outside of a cage, it isn't inherently violent at all. It just needs to feed in an uncomfortable way, right?
Yes.
But you could find surely you could find more comfortable ways to feed this thing. I mean, there must be.
Yeah, but probably. But again, that's something that they haven't explored, right? This is something that's probably been happening for a very long time.
Yeah.
And has been handed down across the family. It's not, it doesn't occur to anyone that there's a better option. It's the way we do this. It's the way it must be done.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's so interesting because I think one of the indications that this is a really fine work of art is the number of lenses you can use to look at the creature.
Yes.
And its relationship with Mags and the family. It's not just a metaphor for one thing. And of course, in some ways, it's not a metaphor at all. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about, that well, that's the thing, right? It's also literally a blood-drinking lizard creature that lives in the basement.
Yeah.
Le Guin once wrote about this, right? She said that in fantasy, the dragon is not just a metaphor for greed, or cruelty, or fire, or hatred, or what have you. The dragon is also a frickin' dragon.
Yeah.
And that is the power of fantasy, in that it's both. And the power of really exceptional fantasy, I think, is that it doesn't try to make that metaphorical side only one thing. You can look at the creature and you can say, I'm going to look at this as though it's intergenerational family trauma. I'm going to look at this as though it's depression. I'm going to look at this as though it's homophobic perceptions of queerness. And all of those are valid, and all of them lend to a powerful reading of this work.
I agree.
It's really impressive.
Yeah. Here's the thing. You could easily see how somebody could write this story and just sort of vacate it of many of those layers of potential meaning, and it would be a perfectly fine story. But it's the fact that we can sit down here and not just think about it in its literal meaning, what the dragon creature thingy represents, what the relationships mean, what does the color mean, right? All of these things give us so many different layers of reading, and any reading lens you take alters how you think about any of the details here. This is the kind of graphic novel like a professor like me would want, because it's the kind of thing where I can say, okay, well, we just read it this way. Well, what if you thought about it this way? And how do all of those things we just talk about now change their meaning a little bit? Because suddenly you could take almost any reading lens and you could get completely different ones. If we took queer theory to this story, this is something we've not really talked about yet at all, but we will have to, I think. If we took a queer theory lens to this, I think you're right. We could easily read this creature as sort of the way it's treated right? As almost like looking at the trauma of homophobia or a representation therein. You could easily read it that way. But you could also read this about looking at gender expression in particular, how these different characters who are varying sexualities and different elements of transness that are presented here, right? They're both adhering to a very specific side of the gender aisle, but presenting themselves in very interesting ways. Because if we look at Mags, for example, very much presents as very masculine, right? The Nessa actually describes her as being butch at a couple of moments, but like lovingly and very sweetly, which I kind of thought was cute, right? Whereas Nessa comes across as quite feminine in her presentation of herself, and this comes up in a variety of ways throughout the story.
Whereas, and Shaun, we should make this explicit, while Nessa is in fact a trans woman.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. I think I'm making that you're correct. I wanted to make that slight distinction because the language of presentation of one's gender comes through in the story explicitly, right? And so there are trans women, but then there's also presentations of gender that may or may not align with one's sexuality or actual gender, whether one is trans or transness, it may be applied there. So in some ways, it actually can get a little complicated in here, which is actually nice because humans are complicated, and I like it. Which also makes Ava really fun because once you kind of realize what's going on, it's like, oh, Ava, interesting, Ava, you're not who I thought you were at the beginning of this.
No, not at all, right?
Not all. Your interests are very curious.
Yeah, Ava is a really interesting character for that, isn't she?
Yeah,
because of her own her the way she interacts with what we can infer of her sexual orientation and her, she is someone whose gender presentation is classically feminine, stereotypically feminine. She is, and we're making inferences here because we don't get inside her head.
Correct.
This is not her story, but and yet here she is, this feminine appearing young woman who's got the name of a classical Hollywood movie star, even an icon of femininity. And she's in this secret relationship with a much more masculine presenting queer woman. It's fascinating.
It's very fascinating. And I wish they'd explored more, but I guess the visual and the brief presentations are kind of, it's not really that story. The story isn't really about that, right? Yeah. And so it doesn't really get to the deep, dark elements. Oh, sorry. I did not mean to pun the title of the book.
Title scream. Let's shout out the title. It's deep and dark. Yeah, I agree with you, Shaun. There's only so much time and space. And that is one of the things that makes a graphic novel different from prose is the amount of narrative space different things take. You do need room for the sequential art to tell the story, and the sequential art does it very well. So if the price we pay is not getting more time with Ava, then that's the trade-off. That's the trade-off of graphic novels.
Well, we'll tell Ava's story later. Maybe Ostertag will write that story.
Exactly. Maybe she will.
She'll become a movie star, or I don't know. Who knows? Out of curiosity, I think we both agree that the grandmother's adorable. But I was going to ask about the mother, but you have thoughts about the grandmother. Go on.
Oh, it is clear that Mags adores her abuela, and thinks of her as her primary caregiver. To be more clear, that abuela was Mags's primary caregiver when she was younger, And Mags has become her abuela's primary caregiver now that her grandmother is old and infirm. And there's a loving relationship. And abuela is adorable as this, older woman who can give good advice about how you need to reach out and find some joy in this world, and loves her telenovelas and
she does.
is and they have fun together within the limits of abuela's capacity to do that stuff anymore. And she clearly loves Mags. He's also the one who set up every conflict and neuroses and terrible coping strategy that Mags has. There's the flashback scene where Mags is feeding the creature for the first time, which is horrible. It happens after the creature gets loose and kills Emil. And the family makes a decision that, first of all, Mags has to start feeding it. And second, Mags' mom wants no part of it. Her father is so horrified by it all that he leaves. So it's Abuela. And Abuela is the one who takes her down and, with love and understanding and support, walks Mags into this life. And is the one who convinces her that there are no other choices, and praises her and tells her how good and strong she is for going along with that. It's so loving and horrible at the same time. And that is such a powerful look at how these things echo across generations. So,
yeah.
Yes, present day Abuela's adorable. But past Abuela has some stuff to answer for.
She does. I will quibble with you a little bit, which I think the family doesn't know that there's a better way. And some of that's like a lack of imagination, which, fair enough. I mean, they haven't thought through this, right? They haven't thought that there's a different thing. I mean, Abuela has. She kind of is like, you should still have some joy in your life. You shouldn't be just totally miserable, right? But they haven't really challenged this system. But the thing that really stood out to me was this has happened to Mags, a child, right, who has this creature she must take care of and all of these things. And you have two sides of the family that are presented to us being involved at this moment. One is Abuela, who is, saying, this is what has to happen, but I'm going to be here for you, and I'm going to guide you through it and provide you the thing, and, like, I love you, and you're really strong, and all of that, which, yes, is a little manipulative and definitely gets us trapped in this system. But it's the direct parents, that I think bear a more significant amount of the neuroses involved. Because both of them, the father abandons, he leaves outright. Yes. And the mother, throughout the story, repeatedly makes little remarks and faces at Mags about the creature. And so there is suddenly Abuela and Mags, very close relationship, because literally Abuela walks her through this, holds her hand through this process and helps her. Her own mother doesn't. And effectively, like, semi-abandons her kid. I mean, she's there, but not really. And every time, like, at the end of the story, there's that bit at the end that really stood out to me, which is once they realize, I can just let it out and, like, just feed it sometimes. And I have, like, my girlfriend now, Nessa, who's, like, really cute, and she'll help and all of that. And it doesn't have to be in a cage, and I can treat it more like a part of myself. And she's walking around with it, and the mother immediately freaks out about it, right? It's like, oh my God, right? Really uncomfortable with it. And that...
He actually walks away. She leaves the house.
Yeah,
she leaves again.
Yeah, this is the thing, I think, is like, Mags is saying at that moment, this is a part of me, and I'm not going to hide it anymore. Hence the queer reading you could take here, if you wanted to, right? but the mother is rejecting it. Not even sitting and going, I don't understand it. Let me see if I can figure it out. Or like, I'm going to try. She just leaves. She wants to be out of that. Oh, it's out. I got to leave. And I think the abuela's responsibility is to maintaining this system, but it's the other family members that are responsible for all the negative components that get attached to that because they don't support her through. Honestly, kind of terrifying to having a weird lizard creature suck your blood as a kid. I'm just saying, it's terrifying. And her own mother and father aren't there for her.
Yeah, it's true. No, that's a good point. And it is interesting to see the layers of how the family trauma plays out, right? Because there are different reactions that all in their way contribute to the life Mags believes she has to lead. Her abuela is supportive and loving and unwittingly, because it's what she was taught, guides Mags onto this path that locks her into a very negative way, a harmful way of dealing with this issue, this problem, this thing. Whereas her father just
scoots.
He just scoots. He's out. He cannot cope with it, and he puts himself first. And Mom is perhaps the most interesting because she does not formally abandon.
Yes. You're right.
But she might as well have.
Yeah. Emotionally, she like abandons.
Emotionally, there's a scene, and it's so poignant, where Mag says, "My mother hasn't hugged me since that day."
Yes. Yeah.
And it's just so, and it's such a powerful sign of the degree of withdrawal that Mags experienced from her mother, again, for something that she did not do, did not choose, something that was inborn.
And something to note, right, if you want to take a psychoanalytic reading, if you wanted to do that, if you think about all of the love that she gets once she begins feeding the creature, the like real love that you would give to a child comes from Abuela, but it is in the context of a thing that's really scary and violent. And so the love she receives in one area, true, it's warm and it's loving, but it is attached to something that's scary. And so the love she should be receiving, that is just love, unconditional, completely like, we just love you, you're the kid, I'm going to hug you, she doesn't get. And so is it at all surprising to us that Mags seems to have so many problems with effectively normal relationships? Every relationship she has till she meets Nessa and finally gives into change, essentially, right, is a relationship where if she got into it, she'd get hurt, right? Or someone else gets hurt. They're relationships that they're like very transactional. They don't really go anywhere past like what they offer in the moment. And it's not like Abuela's doing it on purpose, right? It's just that's like going to cross all of your your affection wires, essentially, because if that's what your love is attached to, is the violent, terrifying thing, and you don't get anything other than that kind of love, I can't imagine you would grow up and be a well-adjusted adult.
No. and she's not, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
And that's, yes, but you're absolutely right. That's a really powerful way of looking at the story.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so sad.
It is very sad. I hate the father the most, though. I will just tell you.
Oh, because he's just gone, right? I think he's in like 3 frickin' panels before he takes off, and we never see him again.
And his reasoning is, it's really cruel, because the mother recognizes like it's there and it's like technically part of Mags, and so she withdraws her affection, right? But the father like uses the language of like, that's your family's thing. And I was like, no, buddy, that this is literally a thing attached to your kid, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You can't just be like, oh, it's your family's problem, they can just solve it. You're abandoning your child because you can't just accept that something that you don't like is in your child, which it makes you a shitty parent. I just want to say,
definitely.
Everyone's kid is going to have things you don't like in them. It's just inevitable, right? As long as they don't turn out to be a Nazi, you're kind of good. Like, I feel like
exactly,
so it's just very.
But exactly, he is interpreting and experiencing his own daughter's life and a fact of her existence as something that was done to him. And that specifically that her family, his wife's family, did to him. And so there's another reading that you could look at with the creature, which is interesting, which is that there's a disability lens to look at, isn't there? Or a chronic illness lens. Because it runs in families, we know that. It recurs over generations sporadically, and it becomes the center of people's lives, and it limits they require accommodation, and they require supports to be able to interact with the world in the way other people are able to with less effort. This is also a disability story.
It is. Gosh, there are so many different ways you could read this.
There's so many.
Okay.
Really are.
Ostertag did something smart here, y'all.
She really did. I believe this is what you academics call a rich text.
It is. Yes. I mean, if I could get my students to read all of this in a reasonable time, no, be honest, doesn't take you that long to read unless you go very slowly. But it is a rich text. It is precisely the kind of text I would teach if I were like teaching a graphic narrative. I would stick this in there because
for sure
it is very well constructed, and I think it does. So it does this thing. We've kind of talked about it already, right? But I want to point it out, which is like there are a lot of different ways that you can do like comics, graphic novels, and these kinds of narratives, right? And they're like the very classic formal versions, like which are just basically drawing from like old cartoon strips, and then they just make them into full pages with your very standardized block structures and stuff. There's nothing inherently wrong with those. They're just that's what they are. And they allow you to tell certain kinds of stories in certain kinds of ways. Right. And then you start to get the people that sort of manipulate those panels, make them different shapes, and then have panels where things move between them, which makes it more interesting because then there isn't like a hard frame that exists for any image. And this one is like the more extreme version of that, because the idea of a panel doesn't necessarily like have any stable relationship in the story. It's almost like the structure of the pages themselves each have their own unique design, right? There are a handful that are very panel oriented, right? And then there's so many where they're not very panel oriented. The panels exist, but there's other creative elements that are coming in that are like bleeding into the panel, or things leave the panel entirely. And so you lose any of that sort of you get like different kinds of focal points, but you don't get that hard frame that forces you to read it as a narrative in that simple way, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And you reminded me of a symbolic pair of bookends in this that I really love, which is on page 323. Mags and Nessa are having a blowout, and Nessa is desperately trying to convince Mags, there we go, that she can have a more out of life, and Mags is trying to convince Nessa to go away and please stop trying to make me have a better life. And there's that moment where the trailing bandage with Mags uses to wrap her hands is literally blocking Mags's eyes in the panel below. So, it's so that this weight she bears, this injury she bears, this obligation she bears is literally making it impossible for her to see other options.
Yeah.
And then, just a few pages later, page 332, Mags has stormed off. It looks like it's not going well for her and Nessa. Nessa has had quite a lovely moment with Ava, which is really great. Really a wonderful moment. But then Nessa's creepy, stalky ex shows up, Aaron, seemingly out of nowhere. He's actually been appearing a couple of times. He just hasn't been as clear. Shows up, and he's trying to get Nessa to come with him. He can fix everything. He's going to make it perfect. Real, like very, very recognizable abuser talk to someone with more life experience than Nessa. And then he says one thing. He says, "Please, I need your help." And that speech balloon, yes, is superimposed over Nessa's eyes. In exactly the same way that Mags cannot see her path forward because of her obligation, Nessa's sense of obligation to Aaron is occluding her ability to recognize what a dangerous, still at this point, potentially abusive, potentially physically abusive. He's been emotionally abusive, clearly. How much danger she's in, and she cannot see that because he has asked for help, and she cannot bring herself to not respond to that. It becomes her all she can see.
Yeah,
brilliant.
And it gets more brilliant because when we get the different version of this scene, right? What we get this weird. Almost it's hard to see. You're not gonna be able to see it on camera if you're watching the camera.
It almost looks like looking at a 3D image without the 3D glasses.
Yes.
But what it's used for in the text is to show what Nessa is actually experiencing and what Aaron wants her to be saying and doing.
Yes.
Simultaneously. And it's not clear which is which, right? It's not clear which is. You can focus on either, but it's difficult to focus on both because sometimes one is muted, sometimes one comes more forward. In one, she is being, a sweet, wonderful girlfriend who is reconciling and realizing she was wrong, and in the other, she's telling him to back off. He's scaring her. He's being weird. What are they even doing? And so it's simultaneously. So it's fascinating that for this one scene, we step into
a different
an abuser's head,
a different eye,
another different
POV.
lens.
Yeah,
a different POV, simultaneously with the way one of our viewpoint characters is experiencing it, which is very different. So
it's very clever. This is one of my favorites
I have not
in the whole
seen
thing.
That.
Yeah,
it's really good. I have not seen something like that done very often. I'm struggling to think of it, actually. Usually people do that with separate panels rather than distinct images within the same panel. So it's a really smart, economical, and innovative thing to do. I'm just so impressed with it.
It is very brilliantly done, and I had a lot of fun, and I also couldn't think of any other instance where something like this was done. It's easily one of my favorite sequences in this whole thing, because as soon as I realized what was being done with this, like, it takes a minute, right? And then once you go, oh, that's what's happening here. Yeah. It really is really a brilliant way of representing that, like, psychological disconnect that's happening in this scene, where it turns out Nessa has been very clear from the beginning, right? We're not together anymore. We're like, I care about you and all, but like we're not a thing, and we're done. Yeah. But in his mind, he has like concocted a version of her that said something completely different, and so he's not just a stalker. He's kind of mentally broken, right? Go ahead.
There's something very deeply wrong with him. Now, yes. as a non-expert, it's probably not smart for me to do like a little armchair diagnosis. But there are elements of some form of dissociation there, some form of perhaps narcissism there, where the narcissist, has a very clear sense of how things should unfold to the extent of scripting it for the other party. There's a lot going on there, and it's good that it's left ambiguous, because we don't need that. We don't need that to be pinned down. But it's just, there's a lot of elements there that are pointing to he's not well.
Yeah, he's not well. At the very least, he's, as you say, kind of disassociated from, at least in this context, a reality. I think it'd be fair to say that that's what's going on. He is following her literally all over the place. And so there is something going on there. I am not an expert in this particular, like, stalker domestic violence realm, but my guess is somebody who is and reads this scene is going to go, oh, okay, I know that. And there's like elements there that are speak very firmly to the truth.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, we have to stop. I mean, we could say more things, but then nobody would have anything to read. So
it's true. They should read this. It's a really excellent graphic novel.
Strongly agree. I really recommend that you read this. I haven't read everything else that's on the ballot for the best graphic work or whatever the category is. I've forgotten the title, but
best graphic story.
Graphic story. This one right now is my front runner, though, of the stuff I'd read. I think because it's so different. It's like creatively, I should say. I don't mean like different, like the story is so different. I mean, the way it is presented, it's so creative. And I love that. That's more interesting to me than, another superhero story.
Exactly. I really do admire the way it is pushing at the comics form and trying to do new things.
Yeah.
And experimenting a bit with how comics works beyond, as you said, Shaun, simple sequences of action to action, moment to moment.
Yeah. Trish did have a comment that we should note real quick before we end. I'm happy my library has My Favorite Thing is Monsters Volume 2, another Hugo graphic novel finalist, so I can read it in print. I thought Volume 1 was very good. And so I think that's one of the ones, if I'm correct, I hadn't read. But protagonist is a girl who sees self as a monster. Oh, interesting. So there's some thematic similarities.
That's another work that looks at monstrousness, yes. And historical trauma.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
so
great.
It's going to be interesting.
Well, Trish is going to read this next. So, okay, folks, we got to end the podcast. So if you'd like to let us know what you thought, if you've read this and you would like to let us know what you thought or tell us about your ballot or something, skiffyandfanty@gmail.com would be the easiest way. If you're in our Discord, you can also talk in there. There's a show discussion channel. There's also a book discussion channel and a movie channel. And there's a bunch more. And if we need more channels, we can make more channels. So again, $1 and join and you can get access. So that's on our Patreon page. If you join that, you'll get access to that. We're on Blue Sky, Threads, Mastodon, YouTube, and more, where you can get our videos and all that stuff. Those are at skiffyandfanty.com/skiffythings. And then every Friday, 7 p.m. Central, like clockwork, we will be on Twitch at Alphabet Streams. That is twitch.tv/Alphabet Streams for this live show, which we recorded live right now, although people may be listening to it not live. So come, please. And then if you like what we do, please spread the word about this show, leave us reviews, etc., and support us at patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. One thing I will just note, because I will have this out in time, Martha Wells will be here on the 23rd of May, 7 p.m. Central, Twitch. There you go.
Right. And I believe, per this extremely handy information that Daniel left us with, I should now be doing a shout out to some of our Patreon supporters. And those include Adam F. the Affable, Adri the Astronomical, Becca E. the Blissful, Kate the Cordial, Cameron C. the Chthonic, Caroline M. the Benevolent. That's not alliterative.
I know.
but apt. Harry D. the Divine, Corkhead the Conscientious, Daniel H. the Cultured, David A. the Debonair, Escape Artists the Empirical, Heather R.J. the Magnanimous, Jeanette N. the Profound, Jeff X. the Gracious, Joseph the Jovial, KB the Kind, Pat the Kinetic.
And then we also have Kate S. the Loquacious, Kendra F. the Keen, Maria the Mirthful, Matthew C. the Magnificent, Nicholas A. the Nifty, Paul W. the Pious, Phoebe B. the Eloquent, Robin H. the Bold, Ryan F. the Resilient, Sarah O. the Rapturous, Sarah the Sensational, Scott L. the Gentleman, that's a reference, by the way, Scott the Dadicus Rex, and Mary the Queen Mother, Stephen GM the Strange, that would be Stephen right here.
Never heard of him.
TJB the Tenacious, and Trish M the Imperturbable. There you go.
Thank you all. We appreciate you.
Absolutely. So if you want to find me real quick, ShaunDuke.net. I'm Alphabet Streams again on the Twitch. I do my stuff Wednesdays, Sundays, 6 p.m. Central. And then if you'd like to find all of my stuff, like my freelance editing business, the history, social media, all that, ShaunDuke.net/DukeThings.
And I am less omnipresent. You can find me on Blue Sky at stephengm.bluesky.social, and I would look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, perfect. All right, required by the bylaws, I must make it happy right now. And so I am announcing this today with Stephen, of all people. We are writing a graphic epic history of Canada in graphic novel format.
Finally, something where all my talents can be put to proper use.
Excellent. I am excited. I don't know what the title is yet, but I hope it is something deeply Canadian.
Kick off, eh?
I like it. Yay. All right. On that note, happy ending end scene.
Night, everyone.